Welcome to Uncovered Crime, where the darkest secrets hide in plain sight, where ordinary roads can lead to unthinkable discoveries, and where one traffic stop changes everything. Tonight, we unravel a case that began with nothing more than flashing blue lights on a quiet stretch of highway, but ended with the unearthing of a nightmare no one could have predicted. This is the story of a woman driving alone late at night, a trunk that held far more than luggage, and police officers who had no idea they were about to open the door to a crime that would shock an entire community. It was supposed to be just another routine patrol for officers on duty that night. The kind of shift where headlights blur together, radios crackle with the same old chatter, and coffee keeps tired eyes awake. The air was still, the roads empty, the silence almost peaceful. But as every cop knows, sometimes danger doesn't come charging with noise and chaos. It creeps in quietly. Tucked behind the wheel of an ordinary sedan, around 11:45 p.m., on a stretch of road that most locals used as a shortcut to avoid the busier highways, officers noticed a car swerving slightly between lanes. Not enough to scream reckless driving, but just enough to catch attention. Was it fatigue, a distracted driver, or maybe something more? The vehicle was an older model, the kind of car that blended into the background of daily life. Its faded paint and cracked taillight made it look tired, forgotten. But that night, it became the focus of police suspicion. When the officers pulled the car over, they expected the usual license, registration, maybe a warning, maybe a DUI. They couldn't have known that this stop would lead them straight into the heart of a chilling crime. Behind the wheel was a woman in her late 40s, her hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, knuckles pale under the glow of the street lamp. She rolled down the window, and the smell hit the officers before her words did. A faint, strange odor, sharp, metallic, unmistakable to anyone who's worked enough crime scenes. It was the kind of smell that doesn't belong on a roadside stop. The officers exchanged a glance. They'd been trained to notice everything: how a driver speaks, how their eyes move, the nervous tics that can betray more than words ever will. And this woman was nervous, too nervous. Her voice trembled as she answered their questions, her story shaky, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror as though something behind her demanded attention. They asked her where she was headed. Her answers didn't match up. First, she said she was going home from work. Then she said she had just come from a friend's house. Small inconsistencies, yes, but enough to raise suspicion. And then, that smell again, stronger this time, carried on the cool night air each time she shifted in her seat. The officers had a choice: treat it like a simple traffic stop and let her go, or dig deeper. Something in their instincts told them this was no ordinary stop. When they asked her to step out of the vehicle, her composure cracked. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the door handle. She protested softly at first, then more firmly. "I don't see why I have to get out. I'm not drunk, I'm not speeding, I just want to go home." But procedure is procedure, and procedure saved lives that night, as one officer engaged her in small talk to keep her calm. The other walked around the car, flashlight sweeping across the trunk. That's when they noticed if the trunk lid wasn't sealed properly, just slightly ajar, as if it hadn't been closed with enough force. A strip of dark fabric dangled from the edge, swaying gently in the breeze. The officer leaned in closer, and that's when the smell became undeniable. He called his partner over. They asked the woman to open the trunk. Her reaction was immediate and telling. She froze. Her entire body stiffened as if someone had pressed pause. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Finally, she stammered, "There's nothing back there, just some old clothes." But the officers insisted, and when the trunk was opened, the night shifted from routine to horrific. Inside the trunk lay 2 bodies, lifeless, cold, stuffed into the cramped space, as though they were nothing more than baggage. The officers recoiled, their stomachs lurching at the sight. The metallic odor of death poured into the night air, no longer masked by steel and upholstery. One officer immediately called for backup, his voice sharp with urgency. The other secured the woman, whose protests turned into desperate pleas. She cried. She begged. She said it wasn't what it looked like. She said she could explain, but nothing she could have said in that moment could erase the horror of what the officers had found. Who were the victims? How had they ended up in her trunk? And why was she driving with them on a lonely stretch of road, as though she thought she could outrun the truth? The investigation would uncover layers of deceit, betrayal, and desperation that stretched far beyond that single traffic stop. But in that moment, under the flashing blue lights, with the trunk open and silence heavy around them all, anyone knew was that a nightmare had just been revealed. The victims were soon identified. A man and a woman, both in their early 30s. Local residents, people with families, jobs, lives that should have never ended this way. Their disappearance had been reported days earlier, but no one had imagined their final resting place would be the trunk of a car driven by someone they knew. Yes, someone they knew. The woman behind the wheel wasn't a stranger. She wasn't a random criminal with no ties to the victims. She was connected to them in ways that would soon unravel into one of the most disturbing webs of motive and manipulation the community had ever seen. Neighbors described her as quiet, polite even, ordinary. The kind of woman who waved when she walked her dog, who attended block parties but never drew much attention. No one suspected that behind that facade was a story dark enough to end in tragedy. The investigation revealed chilling details. The victims weren't chosen at random. They weren't just unlucky. They had become entangled in a personal feud, a toxic mix of jealousy, betrayal, and long-simmering resentment. The woman behind the wheel had a past with them, one riddled with conflict. Detectives pieced together the story through interviews, phone records, and forensic evidence. The timeline painted a grim picture. Heated arguments, threats exchanged, and finally, a confrontation that spiraled out of control. But here's the chilling part after the crime. Instead of panicking, instead of calling for help, the woman made a choice. A calculated, deliberate choice. She cleaned what she could, loaded the bodies into her trunk, and drove, for hours, as if moving them from one place to another could erase what had happened, as if distance could dissolve guilt. She thought she could outsmart the inevitable, but all it took was one swerving tire, one set of watchful eyes, and one traffic stop to unravel it all. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Every seat filled with neighbors, reporters, strangers hungry for answers. The woman sat silently at the defense table, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly as if holding herself together. The prosecution painted her as cold, calculating, remorseless. They laid out the evidence piece by piece, the motive rooted in jealousy, the opportunity born of rage, and the attempt to conceal her crime by hiding the bodies. The defense, however, told a different story. They argued it was an accident, a tragic chain of events that spun out of control. They claimed panic, not premeditation, drove her actions. But the jury had to weigh the evidence. Then the evidence was damning. After weeks of testimony, the verdict came down guilty. On all counts, the community exhaled, relief mixing with sorrow. Justice had been served, but 2 lives were still gone, and the shockwaves of their loss rippled through every family gathering, every quiet street, every memory of who they once were. This case is a chilling reminder of how the smallest actions, swerve on the road, a nervous glance, a trunk not fully shut, can uncover the darkest truths. It reminds us that evil doesn't always wear a mask or announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, behind the face of someone you think you know, and it reminds us that justice, though sometimes delayed, often begins with the most ordinary of moments, a routine traffic stop that turned into the unraveling of a nightmare. And so, as we close this story, ask yourself this: how many cars have you passed on the road late at night, never knowing what or who might be hidden inside? Because on that night, for those officers, one simple stop changed everything. This is Uncovered Crime, where the truth is never as simple as it seems, and every story hides a darker chapter waiting to be told.